Right now, oil tankers are sitting dead in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran just got hit with the largest military strike since the invasion of Iraq. 20% of the world's oil supply is locked inside a war zone. Markets open in 6 hours. And while every analyst on your screen is losing their mind about oil prices, one country is quietly about to make an obscene amount of money from this crisis. And it's not the one you're thinking of. It's Canada. Before you click away, stay with me for 30 seconds, because what I'm about to show you is Canada going from America's reliable little brother to the most powerful energy player on the planet in less than a week. If you're new here, subscribe to Daily Brief and hit the bell, because in the next 20 minutes, this video is going to change how you understand the global energy order. Let's go. Let's go back 72 hours. Saturday morning, February 28th, 2026. The United States and Israel launched major coordinated combat operations against Iran. Hundreds of targets across Tehran, Isfahan, and Karg Island. Reports emerged that Iran's supreme leader was killed in his own palace. Iran's response is immediate. Missiles strike U.S. bases across Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Saudi Arabia claims its oil provinces were targeted. Then the reports start flooding in that nobody wanted to see. Iran is mobilizing forces around the Strait of Hormuz. Wait, it gets worse. Oil had already jumped 3.7% on Friday, just on the threat of conflict. Brent crude closed at $72 a barrel. Analysts had been predicting a knee-jerk spike to $80 when markets opened Sunday. But now we're not talking $80. We're talking $100. Some voices are whispering spikes of $110, $120 with no de-escalation in sight. 1/5 of the world's oil flows through that 30-mile channel, 13 million barrels per day, plus 5 million barrels of refined petroleum products, LNG shipments powering entire continents, all of it in a war zone. And then, this is the part that kept me up last night, major oil companies suspended shipments through the strait. Not reduced, suspended. They won't even risk tankers anymore. Every country is scrambling. Europe is panicking about energy security. Asia is rerouting supply chains. The United States launched a full-scale war with strategic petroleum reserves already at historically low levels. But that's not the real story. The real story is 7,000 miles from Tehran, while Iran burns, while the strait becomes a parking lot, while oil prices go vertical. Canada's Prime Minister is not in Ottawa preparing emergency plans. He's in New Delhi, meeting with Prime Minister Modi, not for photo opportunities, not for courtesy calls, signing deals, energy deals, uranium deals, critical mineral partnerships, agreements that typically take years of negotiation. He's closing them in 72 hours. And here's what nobody's talking about. Mark Carney isn't some career politician stumbling through a geopolitical crisis. Former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, former UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance. He knows exactly what he's doing, and right now, he's playing the most sophisticated geopolitical chess game I've witnessed in years. Here's the part that changes everything. While Trump launches wars and threatens tariffs, while China locks down its own energy supply chains, while Europe scrambles to replace Russian gas, Canada has quietly positioned itself as the only major energy producer that every country on Earth actually trusts. Think about that for a second. Saudi Arabia, unreliable, now directly in Iran's crosshairs. Russia, sanctioned, weaponized its exports, permanently lost credibility. Iran, being bombed. Iraq, too deep in Iran's sphere, too risky. The United States just proved it will invade anyone, anytime, based on a policy decision that could change with a single tweet. But Canada, stable democracy. Rule of law, never weaponized its exports. Third largest oil reserves globally. Fourth largest producer. 5 million barrels per day. Production costs between $40 and $60 per barrel. Very comfortable math when oil is heading to $100. In 2025, Canada exported 4.2 million barrels per day. Almost all of it went to the United States at massive discounts. No other buyers, 96% flowing south. That's not a partnership. That's a dependency, or it was. Carney is changing that equation right now, and Modi is not a hard sell. Announcement number 1, the India pivot. India is the fastest growing major economy on the planet. They need energy desperately, and nuclear energy specifically. According to sources tracking the New Delhi meetings, Tomorrow, March 2nd, Carney and Modi finalize a uranium supply agreement worth 2.8 billion Canadian dollars over 10 years. Canada produces approximately 8,000 tons of uranium annually. It is the world's second largest producer. By 2026, Canada is positioned to control nearly a quarter of global uranium production. Saskatchewan's Athabasca Basin alone accounts for roughly 20% of worldwide supply. The ore grade there is extraordinary. MacArthur River Mine, Cigar Lake, producing uranium at 16% ore grade, when the global average sits below 1%. Canadian uranium is not just abundant, it is absurdly profitable to mine, and India needs it desperately. The country has a massive nuclear expansion planned. And here's the strategic layer most people miss. Canadian pension funds have already invested $73 billion in Indian infrastructure. The relationship, the trust, the capital flows, they were already there. What Carney is doing now is converting that economic foundation into long-term strategic partnerships signed, sealed, and funded. India needs energy security that doesn't run through the Strait of Hormuz. Canada is handing them exactly that. But uranium is only the beginning. Sources confirm Carney is also negotiating LNG exports, liquefied natural gas, with a target of 50 million tons flowing to Asia annually. And critical minerals. India needs them for technology, batteries, and a modern industrial economy. Canada produces 10 of the 12 minerals NATO has designated as defense critical. Gallium, germanium, graphite, tungsten, minerals where China currently dominates global markets. India does not want that dependency. Neither does the United States, ironically. Neither does Europe. They all want an alternative. Canada raised its hand. As reported by multiple Canadian government sources, critical mineral production increased by 10% across 9 minerals in 2024, with exploration spending hitting $2.1 billion, representing 51% of all mineral exploration activity in the country. Modi isn't just buying commodities, he's buying insurance. Energy security, supply chain security, and stability you cannot get from regions that keep exploding. But before we go deeper, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Daily Brief covers these stories as they happen, and this one is moving fast. Announcement number 2, the American miscalculation. Let me take you back to February 20th, 2026. The U.S. Supreme Court strikes down Trump's emergency tariffs in a 6-3 decision. The court's message is clear. You cannot invoke emergency powers to impose arbitrary tariffs, unconstitutional. Most countries would call that a victory. Canada should be popping champagne, except Trump does not care about the Supreme Court. Within hours, he signs a new executive order, pivots to Section 122 of the Trade Act, imposes a new 10% global tariff, takes effect in 3 days, then raises it to 15%. The tariff technically exempts CUSMA-compliant goods. So on paper, most Canadian exports should be fine. Right? Wrong. Trump's sector-specific tariffs remain untouched. Steel and aluminum at 50%, automobiles at 25% with threats of more, softwood lumber at 10%, copper at 50%. These aren't going anywhere. The Supreme Court ruling doesn't touch them. They operate under different legal authority as Section 232 national security provisions. Trump keeps those indefinitely. And then there's the threat that sits over every negotiation like a blade. Trump has signaled a 100% tariff on all Canadian imports if Canada finalizes its China trade deal, which Canada did in January. Carney signed it personally, so the United States is telling Canada, don't trade with our rivals. Also, we're tariffing your steel, aluminum, cars, lumber, and potentially everything else. But we're still allies, right? That's not a trade relationship. That's a hostage situation. And Carney's response has been methodical and cold. Fine, we'll sell to everyone else on the planet. Here's where Trump fundamentally miscalculated. He assumed Canada needed America more than America needed Canada. But let's run the real numbers. The United States imported 3.3 million barrels of Canadian oil per day last year. That's 24% of total U.S. refinery throughput. American refineries in the Midwest, the Gulf Coast, the Rockies, they were designed and built to process heavy Canadian crude. That's the grade they're calibrated for. You can't just swap in West Texas Intermediate shale oil. Different grade, different specifications, different refining process. Retooling those refineries would take years and cost billions. When Trump threatens Canada with tariffs, he is directly threatening gasoline prices in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Ohio, swing states, states he needs. Carney knows this. That's why he's in India instead of Washington. The message isn't, please don't tariff us. The message is, here's what it costs you if you do. Announcement number 3, the architecture of alternatives, January 16th, 2026. Carney is in Beijing, first Canadian Prime Minister in China in 8 years. The relationship had been frozen since 2018. The Huawei arrest, expelled diplomatic staff, dead trade. Carney thaws it in 4 days. The terms are significant. China drops canola seed tariffs from 84% to 15% effective March 1st, a $4 billion market that had been completely closed. Saskatchewan and Alberta farmers just got their biggest customer back. China removes retaliatory tariffs on canola meal, lobsters, crabs, peas, another $2.6 billion in previously frozen exports, beef resumes, pet food resumes. In exchange, Canada allows 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles at 6.1% tariff instead of 100%. Trump's reaction is predictable, but that's not even the most important deal being built. The most important is the Pacific Energy Corridor, a systematic restructuring of where Canadian energy flows. Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, operational since May 2024, raised capacity from 300,000 barrels per day to 890,000. Canadian oil now flows to Canada's Pacific coast, loads onto tankers, and heads to Asian refineries paying global market prices. Before Trans Mountain, Canadian producers were economically trapped. The only buyers were American refineries. American buyers knew this and paid whatever they wanted, typically at massive discounts. The WCS-WTI spread, Western Canadian Select versus West Texas Intermediate, at its peak saw Canadian producers receiving $40 less per barrel simply because they had no other market access. Trans Mountain changed that permanently, and critically, the pipeline doesn't care about Trump's tariffs. It doesn't cross U.S. territory. Entirely Canadian infrastructure, completely outside American leverage. After India, Carney flies to Australia, then Japan, South Korea, building the Pacific Energy Corridor one partnership at a time. Australia has critical minerals. Japan needs energy security and wants to reduce Chinese dependency for rare earth elements. South Korea is in the same position. All of them are looking at the Middle East burning and thinking the same thing. We need reliable alternatives right now. Canada is the only country delivering at scale. Russia is sanctioned and unpredictable. The United States is focused on domestic production and doesn't export significantly. Saudi Arabia and Gulf states are literally in a war zone. China hoards what it produces. That leaves Canada. According to Canadian government trade data, formal critical mineral cooperation frameworks have now been established with Germany and Australia, not exploratory discussions. Strategic long-term partnerships with signed frameworks. Meanwhile, the Casey Leesome's LNG project alone represents 12 million tons of annual export capacity, nearly doubling Canada's current LNG export ceiling. Target startup is 2029, fast-tracked through Canada's Major Projects Office. Stop for a second. Do you see what's actually happening here? This isn't just energy deals. Canada is building an entirely new export architecture that bypasses the United States and funding the infrastructure to sustain it. Sources confirm Canada is deploying energy revenues into 2 specific vehicles. First, the First and Last Mile Fund, $1.5 billion from 2026 to 2030, specifically designed to connect critical mineral deposits to export infrastructure. Having lithium in the ground means nothing without rail lines to ports. Having rare earths in Saskatchewan means nothing without logistics networks to reach Asian battery factories. Canada is building that now while capital is available and energy prices are elevated. Second, a critical minerals sovereign fund, $2 billion over 5 years, not for exploration, for strategic equity investments in mining companies, offtake agreements, debt instruments. What this means in practice, Canada tells mining companies, we'll guarantee purchasing your production for 10 years at a fixed price. Go build the mine. That removes the single biggest risk in resource development. Companies know they have buyers. Banks know revenues are guaranteed. Projects that could never secure financing suddenly become viable. And Canada owns equity stakes in them. This is where it gets genuinely interesting, and I want you to sit with this for a moment. For 150 years, Canada's economic model was simple. Dig resources out of the ground, sell them to America, watch America turn them into finished products, maybe buy some back. It was a colony economy in everything but name, raw material supplier, no pricing power, at the customer's mercy. Carney is dismantling that model in real time. Canada will still extract resources, but now they sell to the highest bidder, not just the most convenient one. They're processing some domestically. They're taking equity positions in the companies doing the processing. They're using the profits to build more infrastructure that reduces dependency on any single customer. And the numbers are moving. Critical mineral production up 10% across 9 minerals in 2024. Aluminum, graphite, lithium, magnesium, molybdenum, niobium, platinum group metals, scandium, uranium. Exploration spending at $2.1 billion, and that's with oil prices relatively modest compared to where they're headed. Imagine those numbers when oil hits $100 per barrel, when uranium demand goes exponential as every country with serious climate targets builds nuclear capacity, when every government on Earth scrambles to secure critical mineral supply chains. Canada is going to generate extraordinary revenues from this moment. And the best part? There's nothing Trump can do about it. He can tariff Canadian exports all he wants. Canada sells to India, China, Japan, Europe. He can threaten to kill CUSMA. Canada builds bilateral deals with individual American states. Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota will force their congressional delegations to scream if Canadian crude stops flowing to their refineries. He can try to pressure Canadian companies, their Western firms, NATO ally operations, following international law. What's the legal basis for sanctions? The leverage has shifted. Trump hasn't processed that yet. Carney has. Let's be honest about what this means at the macro level, because this is bigger than trade deals and oil prices. For 80 years, the entire post-World War II era, the global order operated on a specific logic. The United States was the undisputed center. Want security? Align with Washington? Want market access? Play by American rules? Want financial stability? Work through the dollar system, and Canada within that system was the textbook middle power, respected, influential in specific domains, but fundamentally living in America's shadow, the friendly neighbor, the reliable ally, the country that would always fall in line because where else would they go? That world just ended. Most people haven't processed it yet. They're still operating on assumptions built over decades, still believing America can dictate terms to any country it chooses, still thinking smaller nations have no real alternative to whatever Washington demands. But the math changed, and Iran just proved it. The Iran crisis isn't simply a Middle East conflict with oil market implications. It's definitive proof that the old energy order is broken. For 50 years, global energy security rested on a foundational assumption: Middle Eastern stability, OPEC price management, U.S. Navy guaranteeing freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. That system required everyone to play by certain rules. And it more or less worked. That system just broke in real time. Iran demonstrated the strait can be threatened, potentially closed. The United States demonstrated it will launch full-scale military operations at a moment's notice. Saudi Arabia demonstrated it's vulnerable to missile attacks on its oil infrastructure. Iraq is visibly within Iran's operational sphere. The entire foundation of global energy security has turned to quicksand. Every country watching this unfold is thinking the same thing. We need alternatives, structural alternatives, not tactical hedges, not emergency reserves. Fundamental rewiring of where our energy comes from and who we can actually trust to deliver it. Canada is the alternative, not just because it has the resources. Plenty of countries have resources. Russia has resources. But Russia weaponized energy, used it as political leverage, cut off European gas supply midwinter, and proved itself completely unreliable as a strategic partner. The Middle East has resources, but keeps exploding, literally, and you cannot build a 30-year energy strategy around suppliers in active war zones. China has resources, but retains them for domestic consumption and national strategic goals, not interested in being a reliable external supplier. The United States has resources, but just proved it will tear up trade agreements over a political dispute, impose tariffs on allies, and threaten economic warfare against countries that maintain independent foreign policies. Canada is different, and Carney understands this better than any leader currently in power. Canada has three qualities that no other major energy producer combines. First, massive, proven, economically viable reserves. Third largest oil reserves globally. Second largest uranium producer. Top tier critical mineral deposits, not speculative, documented and operating. Second, political stability, democratic government, rule of law, peaceful transfers of power, no revolution risk, no military coups, no nationalization of foreign assets. Third, zero history of weaponizing exports. Canada has never cut off oil supply for political leverage, never threatened a trading partner with energy as a weapon, never used resource access as a negotiation tactic. That combination is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily valuable right now. Every country serious about energy security for the next 3 decades needs a supplier they can trust completely. Canada is the only major producer checking all 3 boxes simultaneously. Daily Brief has been tracking this shift for weeks. If you want to stay ahead of how this develops, like this video. It helps us reach more people who need to see this analysis. Let's talk about what actually happens next. CUSMA, the North American Trade Agreement, comes up for mandatory review on July 1st, 2026. Written into the deal, every 6 years, all 3 signatories review the terms and decide whether to maintain or renegotiate. Trump is already signaling he wants fundamental changes. Renegotiated terms favorable to American manufacturing, restrictions on Canadian trade with China, limitations on Canada's ability to export to non-American markets, pricing concessions that favor U.S. buyers. Old Canada would have responded by sending delegations to Washington and negotiating from a position of dependency. New Canada, Carney's Canada, I believe is prepared to walk away from terms that are sufficiently punishing. Not from trade with America entirely. The economic integration is too deep for that. But from the formal framework, if Trump's demands are too extreme, because Carney now has real alternatives, not theoretical partnerships someday, signed agreements with payments flowing. And if CUSMA collapses, American refineries in the Midwest lose access to Canadian crude they cannot easily replace. Gasoline prices rise in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio, Pennsylvania, exactly the states whose voters Trump cannot afford to lose. Meanwhile, Canadian oil flows to India, China, Japan, and Europe at global market prices, not the discounted rates American buyers were paying. Canadian farmers sell canola to China without tariffs. Canadian miners sell critical minerals to Germany, Japan, and South Korea. Canadian LNG ships to Asia. Canada's diversification is real and functional. America's alternatives for Canadian heavy crude don't exist at the required scale. Who wins that scenario? I'm not claiming this is certain. Trump may negotiate in good faith. Congress may force him to preserve CUSMA because American businesses will apply enormous pressure. But the point is, Canada has real options now, and that changes everything about the negotiation. For 150 years, Canada lived economically in America's shadow. In 2026, that relationship is being restructured, not because Canada has suddenly become more powerful than the United States. That's not what's happening. But because Canada has stopped being dependent on the United States in any single critical way. And in geopolitics, independence is power. Carney understands this at a structural level. That's why he's building the Pacific Energy Corridor. That's why he's signing uranium agreements while bombs fall on Tehran. That's why he's deploying billions into infrastructure right now, not waiting for conditions to stabilize. He is playing the long game. Canada as the reliable energy supplier for the democratic world. The trusted partner for countries that want stability and can't afford chaos. The alternative to Middle Eastern volatility and authoritarian exporters who will always put their own strategic interests first. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make for explosive headlines, but it works. And 5 years from now, when historians write about how the global power architecture shifted, when they analyze how American dominance evolved into a more genuinely multipolar world, they will point to this moment. February and March 2026, the Iran war, the energy crisis, Trump threatening his closest allies with economic warfare, and Canada quietly and methodically building an alternative architecture of global trade, deal by deal, barrel by barrel, ton of uranium at a time. Before I leave you with the 2 scenarios, let me be clear about something. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is fluid and dangerous. According to Reuters, as of this recording, shipping traffic through the strait has not fully resumed. The International Energy Agency has warned that a sustained disruption could trigger price shocks not seen since the 1970s oil embargo. The Wall Street Journal reported that European energy ministers held an emergency call to coordinate strategic reserve releases. The world is watching a genuine inflection point in real time. Here's where I see this going. Two paths, no comfortable middle. Path 1, de-escalation. Diplomatic back channels between Washington and Tehran, potentially brokered through Oman or Qatar, produce a ceasefire within 2 to 3 weeks. The strait reopens. Oil prices stabilize around $85 to $90, elevated but manageable. Canada's deals still close. The Pacific Energy Corridor still gets built, but at a slower pace with less urgency behind every signature. CUSMA gets renegotiated messily, but survives. The world absorbs the shock and returns to a fragile version of the old normal for a while. Path 2, escalation spiral. Iran closes the strait. US sends carrier groups in. Oil hits $130, $140. European economies enter recession within 90 days. Asian manufacturing output collapses from energy costs. The global supply chain disruption from COVID looks manageable by comparison. American strategic petroleum reserves, already low, run out in weeks. And in that scenario, Canada becomes not just important, but indispensable. Every deal Carney is signing this week gets executed at emergency speed. India, Japan, South Korea, Europe, all of them calling Ottawa, not Washington, because Washington is the one running the war. I think we're closer to path 2 than most analysts are comfortable admitting. The structural incentives for de-escalation are present, but so are the structural incentives for further escalation. And we've seen this film before. Here's what I want you to think about. Is Mark Carney executing a genuine long-term strategic pivot that restructures Canada's position in the global economy? Or is he opportunistically capitalizing on a crisis in ways that could backfire severely if the United States retaliates beyond tariffs? And the question that I think matters most. In a world where energy security has become the defining axis of national power, where you can't project influence, build an economy, or protect your population without reliable energy, which country is actually winning right now? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one of them, and share this video with someone who's still operating on the old assumptions about how global power works. Because those assumptions just became very expensive to hold. This has been Daily Brief. Stay sharp.